All right. So, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Bruce Springsteen Archives and Center for American Music's free, virtual, and very informal series, Conversations with Our Curator. So, I'm Melissa Ziobro. I'm the curator, and I'm also a history professor here at Monmouth University. Tonight, we actually have a special bonus session of the series for you. Our regulars may recall that in August, we were together in conversation with two-time Grammy nominee and award-winning author Holly George Warren, talking about her books about Dolly Parton and Janis Joplin. And 1 week from today, we will be back here in conversation with Monmouth University's own Ken Womack and Ken Campbell about their brand new book, Bruce Songs, the music of Bruce Springsteen, album by album, song by song. The book's not even out yet. It's coming out for Bruce's birthday on the 23rd. So you'll really be getting a sneak preview next week. But today we have a special mini session of conversations with our curator with Nick Corasaniti, who is the author of I Don't Want to Go Home, an oral history of the Stone Pony. And this was the perfect year for this super fun, engaging, and very thought-provoking book to come out since it is the Stone Pony's 50th anniversary. So I say tonight is a mini session because Nick's day job is as a political reporter for the New York Times. You may have heard that this is an election year, so Nick's a very busy man, and it was very nice of him to fit us in. So we're going to go for roughly 30 to 40 minutes today when we would normally go for an hour. So I will start, as always, by asking some initial questions of our guest, and then we'll open the floor to your questions, which I think are always the most fun. So with that, in the interest of time, I am going to skip my usual housekeeping spiel. And I'll just say, if you're not familiar with the work of the Bruce Springsteen Archives and Center for American Music, or you need to check in on our schedule or anything like that, please go visit our website, springsteenarchives.org. Okay? Whew. With that, then, let me dive into Nick. So, Nick, as I noted, you're a political reporter by day, but this book really seemed to me like it was a labor of love. Your relationship with the pony starts in the 90s. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. It wasn't necessarily the Springsteen era. It was the kind of punk music that was finding really deep roots in New Jersey and, would be extremely influential 10 years later. Started in basements and VFW halls and made its way to Stone Pony.
Hmm. And then from what I understand, you go off and you're very busy with your career and years go by. You come back to Asbury Park, back to the pony in 2016 after Asbury Park has been enjoying this renaissance, right? And that's when the inspiration for this book struck.
Yeah, exactly. I was very familiar with the Asbury Park of like the 98 to 2004 era, which was rough. We were coming to see shows at the Pony, coming to the Skate and Surf Festival. And every time it was a come in and come out and hope you escape unscathed. And really, yeah, around that time, work gets involved. I have to go to DC for a bit. And I just never made it really down to Asbury until it, end of 2016, early 2017, when I was taking on the Jersey beat for a few years at the Times. And my memory of like the rotting C8 structure and the abandoned beachfront and just the kind of like ghost town vibes. Was gone. Like Cookman was bustling. There was, all of this just incredible business and art and music, and the pony was still there. And thinking for the my job as a reporter, like, okay, here's a news story. And I wanted to tell that story of this town's renaissance, a town that I was familiar with, but I didn't want it to be that kind of wrote like here's a hotel, here's a brewery, here's, new things that are in the hospitality world or commerce, and that's why you should come here. It's got hip things. Those are important stories to do, don't get me wrong, but it's a place that I had a relationship with and a place that has like a certain fabric that I think is different. I wanted to tell a broader story. And so I kind of saw the pony as I've called it my narrative Trojan horse. And it's my way to tell a broad story about music history, about New Jersey and about Asbury Park, and everything that they've gone through together because it's not a mirror history, Asbury and the pony, but it's deeply intertwined. And so I thought, at first for the paper, and then when I filed my first version of that article at 22,000 words, they were like, maybe you should do a book too. Um, that was kind of the impetus to tell this tale.
So, regarding the way you tell this tale, you did hundreds of interviews, hundreds plural. Is that
Mhm.
correct?
Yeah, I mean the actual interviews, I don't know, hundreds. I talked to over 200 people, and many of them multiple times. Your director Eileen Chapman and I
Oh.
think we talked at least probably close to a dozen times. Because what's important with the reporting process and the writing process of an oral history is you have to kind of create scenes and similar questions and ask a bunch of people the same thing. So sometimes that means going back to people a lot because what you want to create is that feeling of like you're a fly on the wall or you happen to be like in the center of a campfire where everyone's telling these stories and going back over memories and one person's tripping another's memory and the other person is picking up on that narrative and telling it and you get to feel like they're all sharing their stories with you. And so to do that, you have to ask a lot of questions and do just a ton of interviews to make sure that you have enough perspectives because otherwise it becomes, a back and forth or just one person's version of events.
Hmm. For those of you that haven't read this great book yet, I know you're going to get off the Zoom and go immediately to order it, right? If you haven't read it yet, I think a lot of authors do interviews as source material for books, but then they're just kind of in the background, right? If you've not read Nick's book yet, he literally uses excerpts from the interviews woven together to tell this story in the narrator's own words. I mean, Nick, your voice isn't there really, right? You craft the story. It takes an incredible amount of work to do these interviews and then weave them together in this way. Um, Talk to us a little bit about why it was important to you to really center the characters in that way versus, you're writing and you're just, maybe giving a quote here or there, but no, it's just their voices that we're hearing. And I think that's so unique and so special.
But there's, I think, two like equally important reasons or kind of inspirations for why I chose to do it as an oral history. The first is just, I wasn't there in the 70s. And so much of reporting is, digging and finding out about what a place was like, talking to as many people as you can, putting in your voice as best you can, and doing your best to represent what you've reported. But in a place that's like so special to so many people, um, I wanted to make sure that those who lived it were the ones who were getting to tell the story and not me. And I wasn't robbing anyone of their, kind of agency over a place that a lot of people consider home. And not just, the musicians, it's the regulars, it's the bartenders and the barbacks and the people who have seen 158 Southside Johnny shows, of which I spoke to a few. Um, and so that I think is a really important thing. The second is just if you look at everyone I interviewed for the book, these are some of the greatest storytellers in American history. And it's not just Bruce Springsteen and Stevie and Southside. It's Tom Morello. It's Mike McCready. It's Jack Antonoff. It's some historians or politicians. Chris Christie, like him or hate him, is a great storyteller. Um, Same with Jim McGreevy. These are people who are really, really uh, incredible at bringing you into their experience, being able to share their experience and putting meaning behind it. I think none better than Bruce in the book, who's probably the most prominent voice. Um, but when you have characters like that and the like fountain of riches, that's the wrong cliche, but like this treasure trove of all of these amazing storytellers to like Rob that, like, to use my words to describe what Bruce Springsteen told me, or Stevie Van Zandt, or Southside Johnny, just felt like, why would I rob the reader of that? That's what you're here for, right? I'm nobody, but here are icons. So let's let them, really sing.
I love your humility there because you are this incredibly talented reporter, Nick, and yet you recognize that you wanted to uplift and really share authority with these narrators. It's makes for such a great read. I'm so happy you did it that way. Of course, it's not all about Bruce, but he is, as you noted, ever present in these pages, and you got him to write the foreword to the book. Tell us about that. That's a big get.
Yeah, I still can't believe it. Like, I look at the cover. I mean, I never in my life. I've been like fortunate to share bylines, with some of my journalistic heroes like Robert Pear and Carl Hulse. Maggie Haberman's like a current one, right? These are people who I like never would have thought I'd be writing with. And now I have a book that's shared a title with Bruce Springsteen, who's my ultimate, the kind of guiding light in life. It's unfathomable. But two of the things that this book told me is that, like, a lot of people say like never meet your heroes. And I don't think that's true, and especially not if your heroes are Bruce Springsteen and Stevie Van Zandt. Definitely meet them because they're just the most incredible, genuine people. And everything, like, nothing's an act. Um, Everything that you see on stage or in interviews is exactly who they are, which is really refreshing. And I experienced that also with other artists, like the Jonas Brothers, especially mega famous, pop stars crafted in this Disney world. And you talk to them and they're just like normal, normal guys. I mean, Kevin lives, 15 minutes up the road from the Pony. Um, but the other thing is just like, and this is what I tell, I speak to journalism classes too, is like, you just got to ask, make the call, pitch it well, and say like, hey, I've done this thing, I really think your voice is so critical to it, or I want to give you the opportunity. That's like my favorite reporting way of saying, please join me or talk to me in this. And, it went for a while. I mean, one thing that I've learned, uh, in talking to people with like a Springsteen level star, right, is that if they're very busy, the answer is just like immediately no. And so, this happened with a few very big stars that were on tour that I wanted to interview for the book, like Green Day. They were just too busy, you get an immediate no. If you don't hear immediately no, then you know you got a shot. And so even though Bruce actually was on tour, I didn't get an immediate no. And so I was like, okay. And it's really weird to give, again, someone who artistically you look up to so much, but also someone of such stature, like, this is the word count, this is the deadline, like, if you can do it. And about like 10 days before deadline, like a good journalist, he was like, yeah, I think we'll do it. And it arrived 3 days before. Um, it had been typed and signed, which was also just very special to have. But yeah, that's how it all came together. I think in talking to the amount of people from the pony world that I did, it made it feel like, okay, this is a real retelling. These are the characters who are important enough to tell the story. So I can, I'm speaking as Bruce, I can add a forward or something like that.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. All right. Well, because we are in a bit of a compressed schedule tonight, I want to make sure that I open the floor to the audience. The whole reason for me doing this, for doing an extra session, was because Nick's been amazing about coming to Asbury Park and doing events with us. But I was like, gosh, what about our friends who can't make it to Asbury Park, who aren't local? I wanted to give all of you an opportunity to talk with Nick. So let's open the floor to your questions. As always, you may unmute yourself and ask Nick a question, or you can type it in the chat and I would be happy to read it for you. So, who wants to go first?
Sure, me. Why not? Do you know or have you heard of Obi Dietzig?
Of
The music.
course.
All right. Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. Can I talk a minute or two, or am I don't know how much. I don't.
You
I
can
Sure.
have roughly, a minute to make a comment and then we'll
okay.
move on to the
Don't let
next
me go.
person.
Don't let me blab on. I used to waitress in the Inkwell. Did you ever hear the Inkwell in West End? Okay, cool. And I was a divorced mother on welfare and food stamps, and I had two kids home with a babysitter. So I was not your typical waitress at the Inkwell. But Bruce used to come in, and he was dating Joy back then, and he ordered the same things. Like I can remember, it was cheeseburger basket, strawberries and whipped cream, a Coke. And he used to write notes on my pad, like to my daughter, like Kelly, listen to your mother, do your homework. And it was cute. And then it was in the 70s. I should have had the date, but anyway, somehow, and we didn't have cell phones then, obviously, but his girlfriend reached out to me. She met me Christmas Eve afternoon across the street from the Inkwell. She had a black and white picture of Bruce. Dear Kelly, love Bruce. Like, oh my God, how cool. All right, and Kelly was only in fifth grade, and I was, and what did I wasn't a rock kid, so I didn't know all this stuff. But anyway, Christmas Eve evening, I have no again how she did, but Obi came to my apartment in West End. She had two silk band jackets, one red, one blue. One was the Jukes, one was E Street. And they both had Kelly's name embroidered on it, Kelly. And then the end of my story, am I still okay, Melissa?
Yeah, you're okay.
Okay. The end of my story. So, okay, so my daughter graduated Long Branch High School. She was born in 66, so 18, so like 84, I guess. She went to Pittsburgh to an airline travel school for 6 months. Bruce was coming on tour, and so her and her friends got tickets to go to the concert. And she was working part-time in a gym. And so she said, Mom, we're going to close the gym tonight. Bruce and the bad guys are going to come work out. And then she told me the hotel they were staying in Pittsburgh. And this was back in the 80s. This wouldn't happen now, but I called the hotel. I was working at Bell Labs. I'm at work. I called the hotel. I asked to have OB-GYN's room. They put me right through. You know that wouldn't happen now.
Sounds like a security issue, but okay.
Like, holy, yeah, right, security issue. Obi answers, and I said, Obi, and she said, yes, who's this? And I said, oh my God, Obi, this is Carol Alaco from the Inkwell. Like, she didn't know me, like, real well, but Carol from the Inkwell, she knew. And I said, listen, my daughter's in Pittsburgh. She's going to go to the concert tonight. I didn't know if she could see you or Bruce or anything. She said, listen, Carol, tell Kelly to come by my hotel room. So I quick called up her school, had her page. She came to the phone. She didn't know why I was calling her at school. And I said, Obi wants you to come to her hotel room. So she cut her classes. She went to the hotel. Again, she went to the reception desk and said, could I have Obi Deese's room? They let her go right upstairs. And she knocked on the door. Obi answered. Obi certainly didn't know my daughter. She was 18 years old. And she said, Obi, you just spoke with my mother, Carol from Inkwell. Oh, yeah, listen, Bruce is waiting for me. I can't talk now, but I'll have a ticket for you tonight at the window. Kelly thought she's never going to remember me. And she did have a ticket. So she went that night. She was in line with all her friends. She got up to the window and she said, by any chance, do you have anything here for Kelly Alaco? And the lady looked, and there was an envelope for Kelly Alaco. And there was one ticket in it. Kelly went to her front. She had a front row seat. I'm almost done. I sat, and then, the lights get out. The band comes out, Obi comes out, and she's sitting right next to Kelly.
Oh.
And it's like, oh my God, thank you so much. And so they're jumping and dancing, and Obi's all over the place with the band. Then they take a break. Obi goes out with the guys. Yeah, she didn't like Kelly. And then they come back out. The lights go down, and then Bruce. They start playing Dancing in the Dark. He reaches down for my daughter. He pulls my daughter on the stage, honestly. And she was wearing one of those silk jackets that he gave her back in fifth grade, and now she's 18. And she's wearing one of the jackets, and she's dead. Anyway, I could go on a little bit more, but that's enough.
What a story. And I think that that goes towards what Nick was saying about Bruce being so genuine and being, such a genuinely nice person. Let me ask you this, Nick, mentioning Obi there.
Yeah.
You say, Nick, I'm not sure if it's the preface or somewhere in the front of the book, you talk about how there were occasions when you tapped sources other than your own personally conducted interviews because there were individuals who had passed away who you couldn't personally interview. Can you talk about that a little, Nick, and how you handled those characters who had been lost already and couldn't be part of your own interview project?
Yeah, it's the part of the tragic part about doing this book, especially people who passed away while I was doing it, like yeah, the guys from TV and the radio,
Mm.
um, or sorry, television, not TV on the radio. Well, like what I did in the kind of preparation before I started doing a lot of my interviews is I just went through there's this amazing website called newspapers.com that like has a searchable PDF of every local newspaper ever. Like you can read it as it was printed in the 70s. It's incredible. Carol, thank you for sharing that story. I think just as a quick aside, one of the joys of writing this book has been all of the incoming stories that people have shared with me. I call it like my own like chicken soup for the New Jersey soul. Like
Oh,
that's that's how I feel, and I should probably compile them all and like we could put them somewhere. It's just
in the
been
archive.
yeah,
Hello.
in the archives. We have the oral history project at the archives, so that's the way to do it. Um, but in terms of dealing with like really important voices who had passed away, I would go and find their old interviews. And often, especially someone like Butch Pielka, who was the former manager of the Pony, who died, about 10 years ago now, or a little less than that. He was constantly quoted in newspapers, and he was constantly kind of referencing things that I was looking into. So I would just take those quotes and put them in there. Danny Federici, someone was interviewed a decent amount, so I was able to get his voice and put it in there. Big Man, there wasn't as much as I could use because he didn't talk about the Pony too much because he had Big Man's West and everything, although he was a constant presence there. And then you would use, to bring them alive, other people's stories about them. So in terms of Obi, John Eddy owes a lot of his start to Obi. And so he spoke a lot about how Obi started. They did this like was it like 15 Screaming Teens, Can't Be Wrong, a play on the Elvis thing, except just the small number of people who came to their first show at the Pony. Um, and Clarence, there's really funny stories with Sam Moore because they had a very close relationship. So you'd use other people's memories to help bring them alive if you couldn't unearth the actual interviews that they may or may not have done.
I thought that was a beautiful way to ensure that, all of these important characters remained part of the story in this new scholarship that was being created.
Thanks.
Here is something from the chat. Thomas asks, roughly how many times were you able to sit with Stevie and Bruce? Did you have to have all of your questions ready to go in advance, or did you have the opportunity to kind of ask follow-up questions either at the time or later? How many times did you interview them and how structured was that process?
Yeah, so I talked to both of them twice. And they're both very generous with their time. And it's just, with Bruce, it's a little bit tighter because he's got a lot of things going on. Although again, Stevie was equally as busy this year. Um, and I would just say, hey, this is what I want to talk about. I would try and send them some things early just because I'm asking, like, I mean, how many of us could remember if they were like, hey, when you were 21 on this Wednesday in October, do you remember? Like, I'm asking them for kind of impossibilities. And what's amazing is how much they could speak to it. So I try and give them a little bit beforehand to trip their memory. Um, and then a thing that helped a lot is before a lot of big interviews, so like a Bruce or Stevie, I talked to a lot of people who had worked at the Pony, musicians they had played with, like some of the Jukes, former E Street members, who gave me stories. And so when you approach, kind of the people you really want to tell those stories with those already prepared stories, you get a lot of like going down memory lane. And that really, really helped in my conversation with Bruce, just having all of these hilarious like Eric, the Viking, as they would call him, one of the big bouncers at the Pony, is one of the funniest people you will ever meet in your life, and a really good dude. And him and Bruce had a great relationship, early on. And I had sat with Eric early in the reporting process, so I was able to ask him. And anytime I mentioned Eric, it was like, "Oh, well, did he tell you about the time we stole the car?" And like, it would go down these other memory lanes. So that was kind of how those interviews would go. And Stevie, Stevie's such a historian about everything. Like his memory is like just encyclopedic about music history. So I also wanted to use, that knowledge to tease out some things that I think were really important about music history that were happening at the time that, he touches on in his autobiography, which I'm sure everyone here has read, but if not, go read it because it's awesome. But things about how people stopped dancing to rock and roll and what that meant to change that, and what they did at the Pony to change that, and how that helped make the Pony stay alive. Um, so those kind of historical sweeps Stevie's really good at. So I knew going into that interview, I wanted that. And then Bruce, I wanted the kind of like great storytelling and the sense of place. And then South Side, I wanted like the kind of origin story and some of the more funny because he's funny, wild memories. Um, and in terms of what have I seen this year? I've been actually no, I haven't seen a show this year. My only one is going to be See Here Now. I may go to DC depending on if I don't have to go to Detroit this weekend. Um and I will be at See Here Now. I've gone every year. It's in my opinion the best festival in the country. I guess tied with Jazz Fest, although they couldn't be more kind of different. But it's it's such a manageable festival because it's contained. They think about the timing of everything, so there's not a lot of conflicts. You're not running too much. You can re-enter or I think like 6 times, which if you're doing that more than that, I don't know why. So you have the freedom to move a lot better. Um, they're also so eco-conscious that like you can bring your own water bottles. You can bring a lot of things that a lot of other festivals will block. Um, and then for for those like wondering how to get good spots, I guess this is a small enough thing that I'll give away one of my tips. Um, if so, when you're on the sand where two of the main stages are, most people stay closer to the boardwalk because that's where you enter and exit to get on. But if you hug the rope on the far side, so like as if you were walking into the ocean, there's a rope that prevents the crowd from spilling into the water or the high tide from coming up. That's a good way to get back and forth and stay kind of on the side, and the sound's still great on the side too. And you'll get a great line of sight. You often get much closer than like the crowds that pack around the boardwalk. And that's a good way to kind of ensure that you'll get a good spot if you're trying to see as many artists as possible.
Well, there you go. That's a pro tip from someone who's been attending festivals in Asbury Park since the 90s, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's Warped Tour. Warped Tour, I'd give like different advice and maybe, yeah, that would be a different one.
Uh, Other questions from the audience? Anybody want to unmute?
Nick, did you grow up in the Jersey Shore, or where did you live, or where do you live now?
Well, I live in the Asbury area now, and a split time between there and Brooklyn, which is where I am now. But I grew up in Morris County, but the reason we started coming to Asbury was, as I mentioned at the outset, that kind of really vibrant punk scene, had a bunch of local bands that would eventually get huge, like My Chemical Romance and Saves the Day and Midtown and all of that. But whenever there were non-New Jersey bands coming, they weren't coming to, basements because they were bigger, right? If I wanted to go see Less Than Jay coming from Florida, I had to go either to New York City or the Pony. And even though all of those, discussions about the dangers and the ghost town of Asbury Park, it was still preferable to avoid the city, and the traffic that could come with that from Morris County to still shoot down, the little under an hour to the Pony than to brave Roseland or Hammerstein or any of the ballrooms at the time. So that's kind of how I ended up there. And my grandparents lived near Seaside, so I was at Seaside every summer too. So very much a Jersey Shore like summer kid, but not year round until recent.
There's a great quote from Christy Todd Whitman, former governor, and it's a visit to the Stone Pony has been considered a pilgrimage to rock and roll fans around the world. It's a place that's important, not just to us, but to the world, right? So what makes the Pony special? Other clubs come and go, but the Pony has persisted. It's had tough times. There've been, Save the Pony campaigns, but it's still here celebrating its 50th anniversary. Why is it special? Why is it still in existence?
Well, I think that's like well, I have guesses, but part of it is just economics, right? Like I was talking to some of the guys in like, the punk movement who've seen CBGB's turn into a John Varvatos. And they're like, well, yeah, because people wanted that real estate. Like in the 90s, no one really wanted it. So it was able to weather some storms. But I do think the enduring spirit that like Springsteen and Southside put in there, um, you can't remove it. And it really gives it a protection. Because again, as I was saying at the outset, like a lot of people feel like they have agency and ownership over the scene there, and they're going to keep that going. And that really helps a place stay alive. I also just think like, you would never design a rock club to be like the Pony, but that's kind of what makes it amazing. It's very wide but very shallow. So like navigate, like if you just walked in and you have to make it to the bathroom, like good luck. It's a 10-minute journey at a sold out show. But it gives you this unique perspective of being really close to a band in a really different way. You're on their side. And the artists feel that too. Like Mike McCready from Pearl Jam, who, I just saw last night in Madison Square Garden and is used to playing arenas. When he played there, he's like, I couldn't believe I could read a beer label. And it just made everyone feel like they were like on top of me. And he actually reached and took that beer and played slide guitar with it when he was there. But it's that intimate relationship that you get from having a very wide crowd, a very low stage, and no real rail, right? Like if you were to go to the shows at any of the ballrooms like Roseland or Wetlands back in the day, there was still a break from the stage, right? You didn't feel as on it, your hands weren't on it, or your knees weren't getting like pressured. Um, so I think that's it. The other thing that keeps the Pony alive, well, I guess there's two more things. Tom Morello talks about the good ghosts, and as I said, there's as many people there who feel agency of a scene, and then there's as many artists who want to experience it. So because it was so legendary and it had this tie to such an important part of rock and roll history, a lot of artists who are too big to play there still want to come play there. Bleachers is a perfect example right now. They're still playing outside as they sell at Madison Square Garden. Jack Antonoff cares too much, and he's going to keep coming back. And the other is just, the summer stage is brilliant. It allows them to have a 4,500 person concert, which is massive. I think Stacey George from Live Nation described it in the book like a rock club's like a river of nickels. But when you add the summer stage out there, now it becomes a completely sustainable and profitable thing. And there's something kind of beautifully Asbury about the summer stage. Like it's a parking lot with porta potties, uh, but it's across from the ocean. From the stage, you look out on the ocean. So artists love seeing that, and it creates a festival atmosphere. And when you're on tour, if you're on your own tour, getting a night where you can see the ocean, sleep in front of the ocean, have that parking lot party festival, that becomes like your highlight, right? You're slogging through, not to put down any other cities, but like I do think ours is the best. And when you finally get there, it's that kind of, vibrant, laid back party experience. But bands are going to keep coming to do that. And it allows for a big capacity. I mean, Slightly Stupid's the best example. They can't stop, and they got in trouble for not playing bigger shows enough when they kept playing the Pony because they wanted to, and they would throw the party in the back. Like you couldn't park in the parking lot behind it, and they would put a DJ on staff, and like it was as much of a deal to get into the Slightly Stupid after party as it was to get into the actual concert. Um, so I think that summer stage is a big part of it too.
Mm. You know, Nick, you said it's kind of this like indescribable magic. Like it doesn't make sense. The layout doesn't make sense. For anyone who hasn't heard this before at various fast camp things, we're working to get the Stone Pony on the National Register of Historic Places. The building itself is actually far, far older than 50 years. It's not built to be the Stone Pony. I mean, it's initially like a restaurant and a concession stand, and they're just kind of adding on to it willy-nilly over the years. So it is this really kind of organic structure. And it just works because of, I think, the spirit of those who have played there and the love they bring to it. Nick, I want to be respectful of your time. Do you have time for one more question?
Sure.
We've got Laura in the chat asking, what are the top 3 shows you've seen at the Pony?
Oh man. Um, well, I can say the one for sure is when I finally got a Bruce guest appearance with Southside Johnny. It was in 2019. It was at the Summer Stage show, and like when we saw Gary Talent was opening, we're like, well, of course he's gonna come for at least that. And then, he came out and played with Southside, and there was some threatening weather. So he came out a little bit early in case they needed to kill the show. But then the weather went away. So he ended up staying out for like almost an hour. And we took my dad there for his birthday. His birthday was always around when the Jukes would do their summer show. And it's just, you hear about the mythology of Bruce might show up for forever. And it's part of, the mythology that keeps the town and the Pony alive. And so to experience it and also it's such a great like, long guest appearance. That's the first. I mean, the second's probably my introduction. Like Warped Tour 98 there was it just changed my life. I like got addicted to live music. I, really discovered that there was other people out there who liked this kind of alternative punk that I was into and not Britney Spears and the Backstreet Boys. And all the stuff played at like, dances at the time when you're a teen. Um, and then I guess if I had to pick a third, oh man, I'm gonna pick a tie, like anyone does when they're forced to pick three. You pick four and say it's a tie for third. Um, when Gaslight Anthem did their reunion for, or no, it was a reunion show for the 10th anniversary of 59 Sound. And it was, they were still broken up at the time. They hadn't reunited. So it was a reunion both to see like, one of our favorite bands and one of the bands that is Asbury's own and New Jersey's own. And, whenever anyone gets to that national stage, I feel like we just take such a pride in them making it out of the swamps of Jersey and, we're a part of them. But walking around that show, I bumped into so many people who I hadn't seen for like 10 to 12 years. And it was just amazing the amount of nods and smiles and haze of people who I don't know their name, but I know their face from the Lanes, from the Pony, from the old punk scene, even from Maxwell's and Hoboken and things like that. So that was just a great feeling. And then the the one that ties with that is the Revivalists and the Head and the Heart played a summer stage show. Might have even only been last year. I have followed the Revivalists in New Orleans since they were the like house band at Tipitina's, so I've gotten to know them for a while. And it was just one of those nights where I talk about bands being excited to play there, wanting to do more to play there, and something kind of special comes out of them. So these were two bands that, I've been on tour together. They were friends with each other. Um, they would always do like one song together, maybe as, part of the show as co-headliners. At the Pony, the Head and the Heart came out for Kid, one of the Revival's new songs, and then they just stayed out and they rocked it so hard. And like then when the Head and Heart closed, the Revivalists came out for two songs. And it's that kind of that spontaneity that like, the Bruce might show up kind of idea. It goes to every artist. Like it's like, oh, I wonder if, you could be seeing the Souls, you're like, I wonder if Fallon's gonna show up and sing with them, or you could be seeing the Revivalists and wonder, who's gonna come out. And just seeing it in that moment and being very close, knowing those guys, knowing how they play so much and seeing them play with that little bit more energy, that little bit of something special. It's a Pony show versus just a stop on tour. And being able to tell that just from my kind of familiarity with them, that always sticks out. And they're going to be at See Here Now too. And I think anyone going should prioritize them because they're a special band.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Nick, you gave us 10 extra minutes. Thank you so much. We're going to break there with our special bonus mini issue of Conversations with Our Curator, because if you joined us late, Nick's day job is as a political reporter for the New York Times, and it's kind of a busy time for him. So thank you, Nick, for taking a little time out of that crazy schedule so that our friends who haven't been able to get to Asbury Park and see you in person could hear from you, could ask you some questions. Everybody's going to go out and get I Don't Want to Go Home, an oral history of the Stone Pony. It is such a fun, engaging, and very, very well put together read. So thank you so much, Nick. Thanks everybody for coming. Remember, 1 week from today, we'll have our regularly scheduled September issue of Conversations with Our Curator. And we're talking with Ken Womack and Ken Campbell about their brand new book, Bruce Songs. So I will see everybody next week at 7. Thank you so much to our guests, and thanks to Nick.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Have a great day.